Welcome, everybody. My name is Randall Filer. I am a professor at the City University of New York, Hunter College. I work with CERGE-EI in Prague and ISET in Tbilisi, Georgia. I've been working in Eastern Europe since just about the time the Berlin Wall fell. And it is amazing to see, to me at least, the things that everybody in the post-communist space knew in 1989, 1990 seem not to have yet made an impression in Western political life. And so I think the purpose of today's panel is to actually try and bring some grounding in reality to some obviously, I don't know what the right word is, misunderstood concepts in the West. We have three distinguished panelists with us. Let me start by saying that all of the art historians in the audience may have been deceptively recruited to this seminar. None of us are experts on socialist realism in either art or literature. We've seen it, we've read it, but I don't claim to be able to talk about it. So we're going to talk about what socialism really means. With that introduction, let me put one fact out on the table. It is absolutely clear to me, at least in this province of the US, that the discussion about, oh, we're all socialists now, and the surveys of young people that say, we support socialism, people have no idea what they're actually talking about. In the latest Gallup poll, asking people what the definition of socialism is, fewer than 20% of the respondents could give an accurate definition. Many more respondents said, socialism means equality for everyone. Socialism means free education. So it seems like socialism is kind of like puppies. If it's something good, we'll define it as socialism. So I want to start today's seminar with a very simple question to our panelists. Let's set the term of reference. When you're talking about socialism today, what do you mean by socialism? And I think what we'll do is that's a very brief introduction. So I would ask each of the participants to take 2 sentences to introduce yourself, and then no more than 2 or 3 minutes to set the framework of what you mean by socialism. And one thing you will discover about me right now is that I am horrible at pronouncing names, so I hope Agnieszka is not too far off.
Hello, Randy. Thank you for the introduction. So my name is Agnieszka Plonka, and I'm Polish. I'm joining you from the Mises Institute in Alabama. And I'm very happy about what you've said in the beginning, because me, myself, I have been living in this world right about since the Berlin Wall fell. So, and I have actually emigrated to Western Europe for my PhD. And what I've seen there have caused me these cultural shocks related to these big misconceptions and big gaps in general knowledge that people have exactly about socialism and about communism. And so I'm saying that I used to be a geophysicist in my previous life, but I left academia after I've seen it infected with a certain virus we'll be discussing here, namely socialism. And I'm right now in the Mises Institute in Alabama, and I research the psychological nature of socialist control and the psychological implication that it has on societies. So I will generally go into the direction of culture and of perception, but what do I mean when I say socialism? Like, the problem nowadays is when anyone says the word socialism or capitalism, I need to know the person and the context to know what they are actually referring to. So of course, when I hear socialism in this rigid way, state ownership of means of production, everything that has been going on since the 19th century, what Marx was writing about, what has been implemented, that's the way I would understand the word if I was talking to people here in the institute. But it's not the privilege that I have in the outside world. So I would say that socialism today means everything and nothing, which kind of itself is very socialist. It's very Hegelian kind of dialectic. So if you're talking about the current political scene, it makes sense to define socialism by the current mass culture perception, because that's what will be affecting our life ultimately. So I think that the problem is that the culture today doesn't even have a definition. And when they say socialism, they mean as opposed to capitalism. And by capitalism, they mean whatever it is that we have today. So using this word makes you a cool dissident, but a dissident without perception and historical knowledge. But what's really hiding when you say we need socialism because of X, it means you define X as a political problem that only the government can solve. So in the end, it's calling for full politicization of human life without having any regard for actual definitions and what it means and what happened in history. It's just perceiving government as this magical black box that can pass the law and make everything great, because when we will be in power, it will be different. It will be all sprinkles and balloons, and it will be different because it's democratic. Everything about human relations will change. So even if it doesn't have direct connection to like the economic implications of the word as used in 19th or 20th century, it's still very much rooted in Marx's writings. But I argue it's rooted more in culture, and it's mutated, but with the same roots.
Okay, good. Obviously, Federico is not Vera. We miss Vera, but we're very pleased to have Federico Fernández here. So why don't you take it next?
Hi, Randy, and well, hi to all my illustrious panelists. And well, I'm very sorry that Vera is not there and not here, and I'll do my best to try to replace her, let's say. Just as you mentioned, I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Federico Fernández. I am Senior Fellow at the Austrian Economic Center in Vienna, Austria, the institute that is co-organizing this event and co-organizes the Free Market Roadshow across Europe when we can travel. And also I am president of Fundación Internacional bases in Argentina, in South America. I am from Argentina. And just to respond very quickly to your question, I come from, let's say, it's great that we have Agnieszka, who is, let's say, from a European background. We have Georgiana, who is also from a European background, but she's in the US. And well, let's say I'll talk about from the Latin American perspective. And for us, unfortunately, socialism is still a very living experience, not only because of countries like Cuba and Venezuela, and maybe we can talk about that later, but also because, countries like mine, like Argentina, recently, and using the current pandemic situation, have basically applied most of the measures that Marx and Engels recommended in the Capitalist Manifesto. So it is something quite real. It's basically in the case of Latin America, let's say the gradual but very serious nationalization of the means of production, and the weight of the state in some of our countries, and of course there are others that are doing very, very well. It's basically socialism at its best, and almost as Marx and Engels, dreamt it. So unfortunately there's a lot to discuss, and let's say we were joking about the socialist realism. Well, there's a lot of realism, let's say, in Latin America regarding socialism.
Thank you. Georgiana Constantin-Parke.
Hi, thank you. I'm originally from Romania, and I moved over here to the States a little bit ago. I'm a journalist, a researcher, and a political science instructor. And I've lived through the transition period between communism, well, socialism, not really communism, and the capitalist system. So when we look at socialism, what we're really talking about, no matter how it is that people are defining it nowadays, it really is a political, social, economic philosophy, right? And it's looking to create social realities that, as my friends have said, my colleagues have said, is characterized by nationalization of the means of production. And what it really is trying to do, and of course, elimination of private property, what it's really trying to do is to get it to that moneyless, stateless, communist utopia, which has put so many people through so much suffering along the years. And I have personally witnessed all of these traumas that people had to go through. I've got the stories in my family. I'm sure all of us here have at least heard or been part of, or have met people who have been through such things. You know, socialism encourages a beat the state type of mentality. It's one of those things because the state doesn't want your welfare. It doesn't want you to be free. It's not trying to make you free. It's not really protecting you. It's just doing what it needs to do to survive and become a greater and greater power and a greater and greater really monster, if you think about it. And so in order to survive, you have to beat it. You have to not let it be a part of your life as much as it's trying to be a part of your life. And this actually leaves a lot of scars, especially with what I've seen in Romania. Even as we are still trying to really grasp what capitalism is, to this day, we still have these traumatic effects of the socialist system, and we still look at the state in a certain way. So I think it's really sad, but it's most importantly, it's really dangerous that people don't understand where this can go, and that freedom hasn't won. I mean, you know, the idea of being eternally vigilant is real. We need to be aware of what's happening around us, and we need to not let freedom slip from our fingers. So that's my short little intro to that.
There, I found the clicker. Let's keep following up on that and sort of, I'll give everyone 4 or 5 minutes to think about. Imagine that the current political demand for socialism in the US or Bernie Sanders or in Western Europe or even reviving in Eastern Europe, which is one of the things that amazes me, is how quickly people forget. Imagine that that movement succeeds. What is the best that the society could hope for out of that, and what is likely to happen? Take 4 or 5 minutes each. We'll go in reverse alphabetical order. So Georgiana, you're first.
Yeah, I've been actually thinking about that. I've had some nightmares about that, and I do enjoy a little dystopian fiction. So the way that society is today, the amount of technology that we have, all of these opportunities that private companies and states can have to monitor our lives, it's a very scary thought, because this would be a different type of socialism. It would be one where the state and whoever wants to have control over your life will have a lot of that control. You're right, we are seeing sort of a resurgence in Eastern Europe, and I'm seeing this among Romanians as well, but they're not aware that they're doing it. So when they say tax the rich, and I've heard this so many times, here in America and in Romania, tax the rich because they're making too much and because nobody should have that much. I can't believe this is coming from a people who used to be oppressed by the communist mentality. I can't believe that this is coming from a people who have lived the situation of trying to achieve that golden dream of humanity that was communism. Over here in America, I do understand, because people haven't lived it. They haven't seen it, right? They have that excuse that it's never come to them. But I certainly don't think there's any excuse for Eastern Europe to forget what it really means to say these things and to live these things. In terms of how society would look, I don't think you can expect in terms of how people would feel and how their freedoms would be infringed. It wouldn't be very different than all of the other examples we have of communism in the world today. Well, socialism. I have to stop making that confusion, because a lot of people are making it as well. Well, we're not communists, we're socialists. Well, the ultimate goal of socialism is the communist dream. But like I said, the biggest fear and the biggest issue is we have so much more technology. We're so much more advanced in terms of invading other people's privacy. And a communist state, I mean, all we have to do is look at China. A communist state can do so much more with this amount of technology. This is scary. And even back to what we were talking about, socialist realism, for just a little bit, I did in fact look at this wonderful lecture by Angela Harutyunyan the other day. She was an art history professor at the University of Beirut. She made some very, very good points about how this is actually the engineering of souls. You've got art, film, music, all of these things that we are consumers of. All of these things, if they're trying to be engineered in such a way that they lead society to a certain idea or ideal, and we're seeing a lot of these things in cancel culture, censorship, political correctness, to the point of getting fines for saying the wrong word, redefinition of certain terms. All of these attempts to socially engineer and to engineer souls, to engineer minds, to instill in people a correct way of thinking, this is nothing short of the fiction that we might have read as children in terms of the Orwellian dystopia. It is scary, and I truly hope that enough people will not let this happen, that enough of us will have a conversation, because that's all we need. We just need the freedom to speak about things, call them what they are, look them in the face, and not let them take over our lives. Because this scares me. It scares me here in America, it scares me in Romania, it scares me everywhere around the world.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn it now to Federico, but I'm going to take the moderator's liberty of picking up on something Georgiana said. Federico, as you're talking about this, do you believe that socialism does inevitably lead to communism? Is that a path that can be broken, or is it a law of nature?
That's a very good question. No, I don't think it's a law of nature. You know, I think, let's say, the certain laws of man are not part of nature, or not necessarily. That's one of the great things, you know, when we move to an open society, as Popper said, you know, let's say our laws become on their own, not part of nature. But I tend to agree with Georgiana that there's a strong tendency that socialism, maybe not necessarily, but almost necessarily, will end up in full-blown communism if let, you know, without forces to, you know, that will fight it and make it go back. Ludwig von Mises explained this very well, that the very nature of intervention in economics needs that more intervention tries to solve the first, you know, interventionistic problem, and that would end up, you know, in full-blown communism. And this is also something very interesting to keep in mind, as Ludwig von Mises said approximately 100 years ago. If we had, you know, going back to the other question, if we had communism succeeded all around the globe, what we would be facing is the end of civilization, because communism only could work for more or less 70 years because it had a magnificent epistemological help from the non-communist countries that at least more or less show them which were the prices and which were, you know, the ways to produce. And without that, the collapse would be faster and deeper, for sure deeper. So let's say a communist triumph over humanity would probably mean the end of humanity. And we would really, I mean, let's say the situation described by Hobbes would be a walk in the park compared to what we would be facing. So I think there's a strong trend, definitely, and the logic of intervention. And this is also something that we should keep in mind in general for the actions of the government. Intervention measures lead to more intervention and to more intervention and to deeper intervention and to more problems. So we should really be aware of let's say, socialists, good-willing socialists, because the way to hell is paved with good intentions.
Thank you. Ms. Plonka.
Yes. So to go back to the first question you asked here, you asked what would be the best if socialists take over. So I'm going to answer that in a twisted way. Maybe people will finally learn. So
I like it.
At least for a while, because when I emigrated to Western Europe to academia, I had no idea what's coming my way. And a lot of times I just realized the college students, the doctoral students, professors, they are just ignorant, but they just don't care. Life has been so easy. Life has been so comfortable. So what does it mean that we are saying like communism or socialism or capitalism? Is anything ever going to be different? I go to Intercontinental Hotel for conferences. That's not going to change, right? I have my plate full of meat on my conferences. That's not going to change, right? Although, yeah, that will, because I have to go vegan now, but everything will be really cool. You will just give people that don't have money more money, and I'm going to virtue signal this, that I am so kind. And they just do not have basic knowledge. And I've seen people with PhDs from one of the best polytechnics in the world that do not have basic knowledge and basic connections on what actual history means, what has happened, what are the definitions of the different ideas and ideologies, and that they really do shape our world because they haven't been through it. And there is a saying that if you haven't had blood on your streets in the last like generation or two, then you may be as well really detached from reality. So it could be like this massive awakening that, oh, wait a minute, you are serious, like you're not messing around. It's not it actually matters for my own life, because the problem is that they are not making connections with their own life. They just do not know where things are actually coming from. So if you disrupt the supply chains, if you show them that, well, wait a second, the fact that you have food on your table actually means something. You had a division of labor. You had someone do it for you. Somehow it is cheap enough for you to actually acquire it, and you can still, you know, do your masters in liberal arts or whatever. That comes from somewhere. You are standing on like a big civilization, like you are standing on a giant, and you don't even see that this giant is there, and you are sawing off the branch that you are sitting on. So maybe when that branch falls, then you realize, oh, wait a minute, that was there all the time. It is what it is about. I didn't have that connection. So a lot of times people would tell me, whoa, I never thought about this way. I never just made a connection with history here. And I think we should be more vocal about this, but we should make actual real connections that people would see that it matters for them, because so far, those that decide our fate, they live on a cloud. They think that they are being nice, but it's just virtue signaling. They're not really being nice because they don't see the progression. They don't see the link between the cause and the effect. They don't see where things are coming from. And I think the real fight is in education. So what I've seen a lot is that a lot of people from Central Eastern Europe, a lot of people that have actually been experienced by the socialist system, they would see things that others would label conspiracy theories, but we know they are real. So we are still living in the cultural aftermath of the Cold War. And it is true that Moscow tried their best to culturally subvert Western societies. And they did that through pamphlets in academia, through a lot of non-violent means, theater plays, just shifting perceptions. So the fight is in education and in shifting perceptions. And if you read propagandists that defected from KGB propaganda departments, they would say, well, it takes 15 to 20 years to subvert society. Why? Because you take these young people, you school them in colleges, and you just expose them to all kinds of propaganda, and you shield them from any other sources of knowledge, and then you demoralize them. And then this generation proceeds to have positions in Hollywood, in academia, in the government. And at that point, you cannot change their minds anymore. You are stuck with them. And it sounds crazy to someone in the West, but we know this is what's really going on because we've lived through that. And that's only logical that they would act that way. So I think that what's most important is focusing on education and actually teaching people history and economics, teaching young people those notions, because at some point it will be too late. But what would be best if they take over? Well, maybe finally someone would realize what it's doing.
Good answer. I'm going to ask one more question, but before I do, participants in the audience, if you have questions you'd like to ask anyone on the panel or the panel in general, please enter those questions in the chat function so they'll be relayed and we can ask them. While we're waiting for those questions to come in, let me pose a dilemma that I've been thinking about and have not been able to reach an answer to. So maybe someone here will put my mind at ease. Those of us who are in the US hear so much over the last political campaign about democratic socialism. Now, there's a famous quote that apparently nobody ever said about people voting, but I did find one that Robert Heinlein actually did write. So I'm going to read for just a minute. Bread and circuses is the cancer of democracy, the fatal disease for which there is no cure. Democracy often works beautifully at first. Somebody just alluded to that. But once a state extends the franchise to every warm body, be he producer or parasite, that day marks the beginning of the end of the state. When the plebes discover that they can vote themselves bread and circuses without limit, and that the productive members of the body politic cannot stop them, they will do so until the state bleeds to death. If we have the evils, I use the word evil advisedly, of socialism that we've all been talking about, is there a way to reconcile not having a socialist dystopia and a free and open democratic election? Do you believe that educational efforts like we're doing today are doomed to failure? Should we give up, or can it be successful? Who wants to go first?
I can go first.
Go.
First of all, I don't think we should give up, because we obviously, if we give up, it's over. Back to what Agnieszka was saying, I don't think people do learn, because there's a lack of logic. There's a disconnect when you talk about socialism. Equality and freedom, they're not compatible. If you have free people, they're not going to be equal. They might help each other out. They might be very nice to each other, but they're not going to be equal. Everybody's going to be competing. Everybody's going to look out for their own. I think it's really important to make this conversation known to people, but it's so difficult because, like you said, especially here in the US, I've been looking at all of these news articles, and it's incredible the amount of lack of free speech that you have on college campuses. People are afraid of words. They're afraid of ideas. How can you be an intellectual? How can you be an academic? How can you have an open and free discussion if you're afraid of them? I mean, you're already censoring other people's ideas. I don't remember whether it was Aristotle or somebody else who said it. I'll have to look that up. But it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. I might not agree with what you have to say, but I'm going to respect it and see if there's a point from which both of us can find common ground and go somewhere with this conversation. If there isn't, then I respect you all the same, and I'm gonna move forward, and we just can't talk. That doesn't mean that I cancel you, that word that we keep hearing nowadays. I really hope that freedom doesn't lose. But I also think that people don't learn, because if they did learn, my Romanian comrades, this is the very, very sad word, would not be yelling about how important it is to tax the rich, would not be talking about the importance of all of these principles. You wouldn't even believe. I mean, they talk about the Red Plague, which is the National Socialist Democratic Party, and they want them out of power. And then the next day they talk about taxing the rich. How? You know, get it together. People need to be educated about this. And I just hope that more efforts like this will be made to at least have a conversation. I'm not claiming to be an expert in any of these matters, but I see what's going on and there's a logical disconnect there. So I think we should keep going. I hope that the conversation will lead to more freedom and that we won't be canceled for daring to speak against the narrative.
Agnieszka.
Yeah, so to just quickly follow up, of course, when I was entertaining the thought of what would be the best if socialists take over, and I said, well, people, maybe somebody will finally understand. I see the problem you're talking to, and I think you're right. They do not learn. However, I'm afraid what I was saying, that for them to learn, you would actually have to achieve the collapse and actually have them to be very dramatic, stare at the death pit with a gun to your head, and maybe then your synapses are working. But are we really at the stage that you need a gun to your head to actually get that thinking going? I mean, we don't want to be at that. I don't want to believe we're at this point, but after what I've seen, I've been to a conference, it was actually a conference in geophysics in San Francisco 1 month after Trump got elected. And I've seen pamphlets of Communist Party of the USA distributed along the conference center. It was a big Congress center. It was a conference in STEM. And people were taking these pamphlets thinking they are a part of the conference, not realizing what CPUSA actually is. And the narrative was just like taken out from the 30s, which was the most tragic point of human history, when the political alignment was between Hitler and Stalin. And I have seen it in my own eyes in 2016. So I was really, that's how I ended up in Mises Institute. So that's my personal story here. To answer your question about bread and circuses, I think the crucial point here is to build people with character and to have some kind of moral higher grounds, to have some kind of spine. And religion provided that very robustly. And that's why communist subverters were always against religion. Because ultimately, it's not about politics, it's not about economics, it's whether you will take a stand for what's right. Because if you can be corrupted by throwing bread at you, pizza at you, some kind of cheap entertainment at you, and you're going to be numb and blind because of it, then something bad already happens to you before. You have been already demoralized. You have been already for the first stages of communist subversion. Now you're just like a mouth that asks for pizza. But if you come from a religious household or some kind, not necessarily religious, but if your parents actually taught you some moral values and you have your character to stand up for what's right, that's, you know, you're going to break the chain. And I think that's very important.
Thank you. I think you get the last word on this, Federico.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Randy. I mean, regarding, let's say, classical liberalism and democracy, I would say that classical liberals like myself, we should, you know, be aware that that is not necessarily, you know, a combination that should go together all the time. In the sense that there could be better systems. Many people, many thinkers claim that democracy necessarily leads to populism or to socialism. And those are things we have to bear in mind. By the way, there's a very interesting book written by the political thinker, the Italian political thinker Norberto Bobbio some years ago, called Liberalism in the European Sense, Liberalism and Democracy. And it shows that it's an association that has worked for a long time. We like to talk about liberal democracy. In principle, it's a nice system, but also, let's say, mass democracy has a lot of problems. How we vote, it has a lot of problems. And besides, I mean, the cheating and everything, you know, the options that we receive are you know, it's very easy. It's very difficult to express what we really think in an election. Representation has also lots of flaws and lots of problems. It's a friend of mine from Argentina always said that elections were like, you know, going to the supermarket and have preset cards that you have to pick, you know, and maybe, I don't know, one is full of pasta and you don't want to eat pasta, or vice, or things like that. So maybe there are 3 candidates and you would like to get a third of the 3 of them, and you can't in a democracy. You have to buy the full package. So there are lots of issues that we have to bear in mind. And when on top of that, you add supranational organizations, and this is particularly for Europe, a trend that it's quite dangerous. And you know, people sitting in Belgium thinking that they represent a whole continent or almost a continent, and that they can decide. And please, I am not anti-EU. I think it's a magnificent project as it was born. But now with the supranational political structure, I think it's becoming more and more dangerous, more centralized, and more detached from people. And just before I finish, just 2 things, you know, from Agnieszka and Georgiana that I think that were very interesting, and I just wanted to comment very quickly. The tax the rich mentality. Just a very brief example from Argentina, my country. In Argentina, we have been having a horrible economic crisis, like for the last 5 years. I mean, we live in economic crisis all the time, but the last 5 years have been horrible. And nowadays, literally, this is very new. 70% of the population of Argentina make $150 per month or less. 70%, 70 of the population. The politicians, at the very minimum, they make $2,500 per month. But the politicians are the ones talking about taxing the rich. Everyone is the rich for politicians. And particularly if someone is saying tax the rich, you know, has a sign tax the rich, careful, you'll end up being the rich. And they will tax you, you know, to death if they can. There's no limit, you know, there's really, because the left has been very clever in making a lot of people think that others will be the ones that pay for redistribution. It never works like that. You end up paying for redistribution. And the other thing regarding crisis, you know, and you know, maybe people with guns in their heads, I totally see Agnieszka's point, and I think it's very interesting. And unfortunately, you know, people sometimes seem not to learn. But on the other hand, we also have to think that crises operate in a way like, you know, playing the Russian roulette. And you don't know what's going to happen after the crisis. You can end up, you know, maybe with Milton Friedman, but you can end up also with Idi Amin. You never know what's going to happen after. And that's a big, I mean, what my point is, let's try to avoid crisis. Let's try to, you know, continue these efforts. Let's try also from, let's say, the liberty camp, be more on the offensive. Maybe we are too passive. Maybe we are, you know, always trying to respond to the next stupid idea. And we should try to be more proactive in order to, I'm not saying impose our ideas, but at least in order to make our ideas more relevant in the social conversation.
Thank you. We are supposedly at the end of our time, but I'm going to take the privilege of letting this go a little bit longer. Hopefully people will stay with us. We do have one fascinating question from the audience. I wish I had thought of it, but with everything that's going on, and you all came to this with reputations of being in the liberty, freedom, non-socialist camp. What lessons would you draw from the variety of responses around the globe to the COVID crisis, can we say anything about whether more open, more individualistic, more free market oriented societies did better or worse than more dirigist, essentially controlled societies? Same thing for states within the US. Has anything about the crisis changed your opinions or reinforced them? Who wants to try first?
I'll go very quickly. It's a very good question, and probably I don't have the best answer, but just to go very quickly, I think, let's say, worldwide, when we, let's say, think about this last 3 months or so and all this period, there will be very little to be proud of. And particularly in the so-called West, you know, or free world, there's very little. Of course, there are exceptions, but there's really very little. I think we will see this as a totally personal liberty killer, everything that has happened, and what is worse, you know, like an absolute hysterical reaction. And so this is going, I think, a time of that is going to be studied for probably a very long time, this period, because what has happened. And I don't want to go to any, let's say, conspiranoid theory or anything like that, but it's a very dangerous experiment. And particularly in the West, we should be totally ashamed that Sweden was the exception and not the rule. What we did of putting healthy people in quarantine has never happened in the history of humanity. We are the first, and we should be really ashamed of that. And also that in several countries, China has been taunted as an example to be followed. I mean, please, China is a magnificent country. The Chinese Communist Party has been presented as a role model, and that is absolutely disgusting.
Anyone else?
Yeah,
yes.
I definitely agree with what Federico said. I just that there were conversations in Romania and things of that nature that happened here in Michigan, where people were actually talking about coming into other people's homes and taking those residents over 65 and putting them in hotels to keep them safe. I mean, I'm sure that was their intention, but if you take such a large number of a vulnerable population, first of all, you're taking people from their homes, really, and you're putting them in a place where you think that they're safe. Those are vulnerable people. They're not going to be safe. And you can see that here in Michigan with what the governor did in putting people in old folks' homes. And a lot of people have died because of that. So I think Federico is absolutely right. We're going to be ashamed of a lot of these things. And yes, like he said, Sweden, you know, this trust that people don't want to die. They don't want to get sick. So they're going to take all these good measures for their health. But you saying that you're going to come into their house and you're going to take them from there and you're going to put them in certain places, this is the beginning of the end for freedom for me. I remember speaking to people in Romania and how devastated they were psychologically. Every single day, it was almost a psychological attack. Every single day on the news, it was just bleak and black and horrible and terrible. And the news would sensationalize everything that was going on. And so people had a lot of mental health issues. They were depressed. They weren't getting any sunshine. They weren't getting any vitamin D. They weren't going outside. So they were becoming physically more vulnerable to the virus. So a lot of these measures have been horrible. And to that point, Sweden, the way that it handled the situation doesn't seem that it's much different than any other country. So what are we doing? And also to that point, by the way, since it's trusted in its people to have individual responsibility, so much for the Nordic model that's been taunted by Bernie Sanders as being socialist, because that's further from socialism that you could get. So yeah, this is going to be studied for a long time, and I'm hoping that good lessons will be learned from this, and that people will in fact see the logical connections, as opposed to how from former Soviet countries they don't seem to always see these connections.
And final words?
Yes, and So to follow up for Georgiana said, what I'm really scared about this, the COVID situation is a bit aside of the crisis itself. Firstly, it's a great opportunity to blame an external factor for the economic crisis and even deepen people's mistrust for whatever they think capitalism is. And secondly, it's a great way for them to see how people react to lockdowns, how people react to closed borders, how people react to police mandated hour when you have to be at home. Are they going to, how much of that are they going to endure? Of course, now there is the virus rationalization, but you can slowly take that away and see how much you can actually do to people, how much you can control them, and where's the breaking point. And I'm just scared that even if it's not intended to be this kind of social science study, they will take that data and they will use it. They will know how, how resilient we are and how much we will fight for freedom. It doesn't have to be engineered that way, but now they see what they can do to us. And also there is this psychological link between people that call generally in politics for more government control, and it seems that these people seem to be more prone to fear and more prone to basically going with all the possible lockdowns. So the question is it really about the virus at this point when it comes to these measures, or is it about something else? And are they using it to sell us the idea of control?
Thank you. I have found this fascinating. I hope the audience has as well. I hope very much that I will come across all of you in physical rather than virtual space soon. I think I am speaking for all four of us. We don't hide. You can Google any of our names and find us if you want to continue this discussion offline. I have to do a final commercial or my staff will kill me. This project is coordinated by the Free Market Roadshow. The Central European sponsor is something that I work on called the Economic Fundamentals Initiative. We are in the process of translating basic economic material into all of the languages of the post-communist world. If you want to find out more about the books and the process that we're doing, we'll go live with our first set of texts electronically this summer. You can check it out at www.efi.org, and I look forward to hearing from you, and I look forward to the next Free Market Roadshow virtual roadshow. Thank you, everybody.